Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zakir Jacob. Prime Minister Modi is in Kazan in Russia for the 16th edition of the BRICS Summit. Now, BRICS as a term was coined by the Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill back in 2001 for what he described as the fastest growing emerging economies of the world at that time. Now, 20 years is a long time in geopolitics, and therefore, as you would expect, a lot has changed within BRICS. BRICS now is no longer just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There are newer members. In fact, this edition is the first one with the newer members, which include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, UAE, etc. Now, BRICS is also being seen primarily now as an anti-West bloc led by the likes of China and Russia. So what is a country like India doing in such a bloc, along with blocs like the SCO, which also India is part of? What are countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE? And remember, these countries are hell-bent against a country like Iran. This is perhaps the only grouping in the world where Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran are part of this newest set of members of BRICS. What are they doing together in such a grouping? What is it that binds the BRICS group of countries? All of these are questions that need to be asked. But there's also the interesting prelude to this meeting itself. The Prime Minister had a 1-hour-long bilateral meeting earlier today with the President of Russia. This is the second time he's met with President Putin just in the last 3 months. He is going to have, within the hour, a meeting with the new Iranian President, Mr. Pezeshkian. It's the first time that Prime Minister and the new Iranian President will be meeting. And tomorrow, most likely, and there is a lot of speculation about this, that there will be a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China. If it happens, it will be the first time in 5 years that the leaders of India and China have met. And like I said, the prelude to this meeting is the announcement yesterday that India and China have reached an arrangement for patrolling at the disputed and extremely hostile line of actual control, where hostilities have continued for the better part of the last 4 years. So the question then is, as India sees it, is BRICS a convenient boat to be on at a time when tensions are there between India and its traditional Western partners, whether it is Canada? Certainly that bilateral relationship has taken a nosedive. And even with the United States, with the opening of the charges against a former Indian intelligence official, are things not as rosy as they seem to be? But first, the story of what is happening in Kazan.
In BRICS as an important voice in the growing debate around the world on multipolarity, on the need for global governance reform.
रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं।
All right, so is it a clear signal by the Modi government, not just to the grouping of BRICS members and the new adjunct members who've joined, but also possibly to some of its Western partners, America included? Ksenia Kondratieva is a senior Russian journalist. She'll be joining us in a moment. Andrew K.P. Leung is a China strategist joining us from Hong Kong. Professor Peter Kuznick, Professor of History and Director of Nuclear Studies at the Institute of at the American University. Lieutenant General retired S.L. Narasimhan is adjunct professor with the National Institute of Advanced Studies and served as the Indian Defence Attaché in China, also member of the National Security Advisory Board. And G. Sarthi, former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, is also joining us. Professor Kuznick, let me start with you first. So earlier today, Prime Minister Modi met with Russian President Putin. Within this hour, he will be meeting with the Iranian President, the new Iranian President, Masoud Pezeshkian. And tomorrow, there is a lot of speculation, great likelihood that there will be a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China. How are these meetings being viewed in Washington, coming as they do at a time when, like I said in my opening intro, it's not exactly a bed of roses what we've seen transpire between India and the United States in the last few weeks, and certainly between India and Canada in the last few months.
Well, we have to look at the global picture right now. The IMF meeting is taking place at the same time, but we've got terrible tensions in three hotspots around the world. So the meeting is occurring at a very crucial moment. The Middle East is ready to explode. The situation in Ukraine is going very badly for the Ukrainians, and the tensions in the South China Sea and around Taiwan are still quite palpable. So the fact that this meeting is taking place is not getting a lot of attention in the US media right now, but around the rest of the world, this is major news, and it has effectively eclipsed the IMF meeting, which is very, very unprecedented. So what's emerging is a global rebellion against the hegemony of the United States and the dollar. And we look at the position that the BRICS nations occupy. By the end of the decade, BRICS will dominate 37% of global GDP. Right now, the G7 has 30%, but by the end of the decade, that's going to go down to 28. And there are a lot of nations lining up to join BRICS at this point. So they now have 9 with the 4 new additions, but there are some 30 more who are knocking at the door. So this is posing the first real threat to U.S. global hegemony since the Cold War.
So let me ask General Narasimhan, if indeed this is the case, that it is posing a threat to U.S. global hegemony, and like I said at the top, the Prime Minister has met with the Russian president, he's meeting with the Iranian president, and tomorrow there will be likely a meeting with the Chinese president. And Russia, Iran, China are seen principally in Washington and in the European capitals as the ones who want to change the existing world order. They are the ones who want to upend what has been the established world order, certainly since the end of the Cold War. And India, which is seen as a partner by the Western countries, primarily the US, is sort of hobnobbing with these parties, whether it is BRICS, whether it is SCO, etc. The question that's being asked is, how can India have 2 legs in 2 different boats? You're also part of the Quad, which is primarily aimed at China, although no one will say it in as many words. But at the same time, you're also having one foot in a boat which is predominantly now a Russia-China-driven enterprise, which is BRICS.
Thank you very much for getting me on your program. Please look at this BRICS in the time frame aspect. BRICS was not started yesterday because of all these things were happening. BRICS came up quite some time ago, and then it came up with a particular agenda in mind, of economic agenda in mind. And of late, we have been seeing the multilateral systems have not been functioning really well. And therefore, you find these minilaterals and plurilaterals and multilaterals are coming up into play, so that people who can have a common understanding and a common desire to work on a program which everybody agrees, come together to do these kind of things. So if you look at it from one angle, it is something to do things for themselves in a better manner than what it was happening before. And in another way, if you see it, the Western way of looking at it is, okay, this is coming up as a different block, etc., etc. So my own understanding is that you must see it in this light, that the multilateral systems have not been really working well. The Bretton Woods financial institutions have their own issues. Therefore, you find institutions like I2U2, RIC, BRICS, SCO, all of them are coming up in some form or the other. So, just because a number of countries want to join BRICS, like for example, today the list went up to almost 40. This is being also seen as a different block that is coming up into play. But all 40 of them are not going to join BRICS overnight and come up members, etc. So you find you need to look at it from this angle, that it is coming up as an alternative to in the form of multilaterals, plurilaterals, and multilaterals. And this is one of the multilaterals that is coming up into play.
So let me ask Ambassador Parthasarathy, the fact that this is happening, this meeting is happening just a day after India announced, and today it's been corroborated by China, that there is a thaw, there is a détente at the line of actual control. We're going back to the pre-2020 position. A patrolling arrangement has been arrived at between both countries. We don't know the details of it. We have some elements, but we don't know the bare bones details of it. The question then is, So this hostility being resolved, as much as it has been yesterday after the announcement, that plus the meetings that the Prime Minister is having with the leaders of Russia, Iran, China, wouldn't this be seen as at least from a Western point of view, destabilizing? Is India also trying to send out a signal to, certainly to Ottawa, to Washington, that look, we have friends in many places, and if you think you can use some Khalistani elements to try and, rattle us a bit, then we can sort of notch it up one or two steps too?
Well, let me say that the Khalistani episode is restricted to a genius who's the Prime Minister of Canada. Mercifully, nobody else is involved in that. But this is it's an old issue. After the Soviet Union collapse, we were seeing a world of Western hegemony. And it was very, very clear that the Western countries were first going to squeeze breaking up Soviet Union and also dominate the world currency-wise. It was for this reason we started the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Saudi Arabia. Now, the question is, where do we go from there?
Yeah.
The BRICS has worked well. It has its bank in South Africa, but it has not developed a clout politically. And therefore, I think, and that it was more representative. As you were saying, large numbers are applying for representation. But the reality today, Zaka, is the American domination globally of the world economy. We are all at the mercy of the US dollar. We are therefore at the mercy of how the Americans move. And therefore, I think we already have got moving within BRICS, as I said, with the banking facilities in South Africa. But we do need a much greater economic integration. And what is being suggested by bringing in others, 4 members really, and Ethiopia, Egypt, and most Iran, and
Saudi Arabia and UAE, yeah, those are the newer members, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if you ask me, the UAE is the friendliest country to India amongst the Gulf. It is the country with whom we have a huge economic setup of cooperation, including over 2 million Indians working there. So I think, to us, this is the beginning of expanding the bank setup earlier.
Okay.
You've got now the oil-rich countries also in. But I think we have to work much closer to develop the sort of bank which we can have.
So I'll come to that de-dollarization part in a second. Let me also ask Andrew Leung this.
The almighty dollar.
Andrew Leung, for 4 years, India and China were, having troops, 50,000 on either side, eyeball to eyeball confrontation. In Galwan, 20 Indian soldiers died, and India's contention is a far larger number of Chinese soldiers died as well. And we've had the first step of disengagement formally announced yesterday. Now, is India to forget all of what happened in the last 4 years and, go along merry with this multilateral arrangement of BRICS, where China and Russia clearly have oversized influence? India is also part of an SCO, which is primarily a China-driven arrangement. And again, this contradiction that India is part of the Quad, which willy-nilly, whether they say it or not, is meant for free and open Indo-Pacific. So the question that should be asked is, who is making the Indo-Pacific unfree? There is only one answer. There's only one country that is doing so. So, what binds BRICS? What is BRICS's glue that brings, for example, again, I bring that example to the forefront. Saudi Arabia and Iran are part of one grouping of nations. I can't think of any other group of nations other than perhaps the United Nations General Assembly that you have Saudi Arabia and Iran as part of the same platform.
Well, first of all, let's be real. The petroleum agreement doesn't mean that the border disputes between India and China are thereby resolved.
Oh, not at all.
Nor does it mean that, well, no, let me finish. Yeah. Nor does it mean that even the line of actual control will be clearly defined. It only means that in firm attempt to de-escalate, as already agreed by both leaders many months ago. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think what we're seeing here is a almost transformational dynamics of the global order, whereby, as pointed out earlier, the U.S. hegemony seems to be less effective, particularly with increasing doses of American unilateralism, imposing its will on many countries in the developing South, in the global South. And of course, as the global South is rising in this economic cloud, they're now rallying up to each other as a counterweight. But then the third point I like to make is that
But Mr. Liang, you say it's imposing U.S. hegemony. There are two wars going on right now. One in Russia, Ukraine, the other between Israel and Hamas. What can BRICS do to stop those two wars?
Well, I mean, the BRICS is not there to solve all problems. What I'm trying to say is that it represents a definite momentum of the global South to rally up each other as a counterweight against U.S. Hegemony. But the point I'm trying to make just now, before you interrupted me, was that the idea of blocks doesn't work anymore. Even though the countries are joining the BRICS, it doesn't mean that they want to form blocks. And even in Asia, if you ask all the Asian countries, in the Southeast Asian countries, although they are good friends with China, but they're also good friends with the United States and with India. So I think that we're seeing also a more nuanced relationship.
But by the way, none of the Southeast Asian countries are part of BRICS. I just want to underline that none of the Southeast Asian countries, nor Japan, nor South Korea. But be that as it may, I want to ask General Narasimhan. You know, I'm coming back to that fundamental moot point, which is that let's take a 30-year view. For India's rise, which is the one country that is most inimical to that rise? I think from evidence of the last 4 years, it's very clear that it is China. Now, the question is, can you find a new normal, a new modus vivendi to sort of exist with each other, because you can't keep going, having these hostilities. At the same time, to actually think that, we can be part of a China-led multilateral arrangement like BRICS or SCO, and at the same time also be part of Quad. I just think you're putting your legs in two different boats, and inevitably when you do that, you end up drowning. So the question is, how do you find that modus vivendi to coexist with China? Because after all, as Pranab Mukherjee famously said, in the context of Pakistan, that is, you can only choose your friends, not your neighbors. But that doesn't mean that you're part of all of these multilateral arrangements, which are frankly self-contradictory.
There are 2 points as answer to your question. The first point is that world is slowly moving towards a bipolar world over a period of time. Maybe it may take 30 years, 40 years, whatever time it takes. And in that particular period, you will find some kind of competition coming up even in this region. And that will play out between India and China. That is a given. Even if the boundary issue in some form gets stabilized, like Mr. Lung said, that it is not a full resolution. It is going to take a long time to do this. However, for the same strategic space when India and China are looking at, you will find some kind of competition coming up in this place. That is the point number one, that you cannot wish away. The second point is regarding this question about how to deal with both these groups having two legs on two boats. That is what strategic autonomy is all about. Wherever your interests are aligning with, this group, you do support, you do form part of that particular group. And if your interests are lying with in a particular issue with the other group, you do that. So that is what the strategic autonomy is all about. We take that decision based on our interests and our people's interests, and that is how we are able to manage both.
No, but
Please look
General
at
Narasimhan,
this.
at some point, aren't members of either group going to say, who is this joker in the pack who keeps jumping from one group to another? If you are saying that eventually we're going to move into two blocks like we saw through much of the Cold War, then India needs to make that choice. The question is, and I think it's a fairly easy choice, but the point is, how much elbow room does a country like India have to jump from the Quad box on one day to the BRICS box on the next day?
See, it is like this. If you are looking at two blocks and then India being jumping between two, then that your argument becomes okay. But what I am trying to tell you is that wherever our interests are matching, we are going to take, and we are part of both the sides. We are not going to be jumping from each one to other. We are going to look at issues and then go along with each of these groups. And that is where the strategic autonomy comes and plays about. And that is what we have been doing. If you look at our stance on Russia, Ukraine, look at our stance on Israel, Hamas, that is what we have been doing. And I don't think there has been a major pushback on this from both the sides.
Okay, so let me ask Professor Kuznick about this de-dollarization. Now, admittedly, one of the economic rationales, and there is some merit in this, for why the BRICS countries have come together, and now you have newer members like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, etc., is to try and reduce the dependence on the dollar. As of today, 89% of all global trade, all foreign trade, happens in the dollar. Now, do you see that changing in the foreseeable future? But more importantly, the G7 countries, as of today, the G7 countries account for about 30% of global GDP, about 29% of global GDP, about 30%, let's say, whereas the BRICS countries, which is the five primary BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, account for 27 trillion. If you add the newer countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, etc., into it, and the UAE, that would be 30 trillion, slightly more than what is the current G7. The problem is the BRICS countries are growing at a much faster clip than the G7 countries are. And at some point in the near future, if not the foreseeable future, the BRICS countries will, as a bloc, be more valuable in terms of GDP compared to the G7 bloc.
Yeah, the trajectory is clearly in the direction that you're indicating. The global south is on the rise. Asia is really the driving force in terms of global development. Europe is in decline, and the US has deep economic problems, $35 trillion indebtedness. And nobody knows what this election is going to bring. What if Trump does get reelected? What does that mean in terms of trade war? We know he's going to start a trade war with China, but the Europeans are also worried about the consequences of a Trump presidency and his fulsome embrace of tariffs. So I think that the world, I go back to something the London Economist said. They said that to Biden, this is a struggle between autocracy and democracy. To the rest of the world, it's a struggle between autocracy and hypocrisy. So they see the U.S. and they see the role that the U.S. is playing in sanctioning countries it doesn't like. So the dollar has become a tyranny to much of the world right now. And when they look at the United States' role in supporting Ukraine so aggressively, at the same time that they're not putting any restraints on Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I mean, the hypocrisy is so palpable and so infuriating. So I think that part of this is a statement about U.S. domination, U.S. hegemony over the past 75, 80 years. And people are looking for a new order.
No, I think Professor Kuznick's point is an absolutely valid one. I think people are raising very valid questions. On the one hand, America, gives us lectures to Mr. Putin about war and excesses of war and expansionism and so on. And then look at what Mr. Netanyahu is doing in Israel. There's simply no fetters around him. People are questioning, Ambassador Parthasarathy, how Is this not a case of blatant double standards?
You know, I look at this purely in terms of my country's interests, India's interests. Now, we've had a record of being able to maintain relations successfully on both sides of the fence. Right now, we have a relationship with the US, we have a good relationship with the Russians, and yes, we do, let us be real, have serious, broader problems with China. But nevertheless, it would be foolish of us to ignore China's emerging role as a power, though that is now slowing down. So I think what we have done, and this I believe is wise, and this is not any one government, it has transcended elected governments in India. For God's sake, widen your options, keep your options open, never get too close and embracing any one party which can 5 years later dump you. And what we have done now is that we have an equally good relationship with the US and Russia. The Americans have not liked it, but they need us to balance China. So we have managed very well, and they may need us to balance China, but I will use that to bring China around. So we are playing a global, trilateral, multilateral game. And coming to the latest persons like the UAE is our strongest partner across the in the Arabian Sea. Millions of Indians live there.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars come from there. And if you ask me, but rather than talk of America and others, we look more closer to home, where UAE and other Gulf countries should be involved. And I think what we are doing is trying to make these organizations inclusive. And if we can't make the organizations inclusive, we have ourselves a foreign policy which is inclusive.
So let me ask Mr. Liang.
We're not going to change our relations
yeah.
We're not going to change our relations with Israel.
I'm going to come to the concluding part now. Mr. Liang, I come to one more. If China has ambitions of changing the world order, and if Russia is sort of playing along because it suits Russia's interests of changing the world order, clearly India's interest is in the existing world order. Yes, India has issues with some parts of that, the Bretton Woods institutions, the reforms of the UN Security Council, etc. Those are issues. Notwithstanding that, the existing world order has been beneficial for India and for India's continued growth trajectory over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. It is important that the world order is preserved as it is now. How do you fundamentally reframe that when Japan is not part of this arrangement, South Korea is not part of this arrangement, none of the ASEAN countries are part of this arrangement? Forget about, okay, you want to take a non-Western world view. Absolutely, go ahead and do it. And in Africa, other than South Africa, and now Ethiopia is a new member, no other member of Africa is part of this arrangement. Other than Brazil, no other member of Latin America is part of this arrangement. How is this arrangement going to be the dawn of a new world order?
Well, first of all, I don't think that China wants to change the world order, using your own word. China
it absolutely does. It absolutely does.
China wants to modify the world order. It doesn't want to change it because there are certain failings of the world order. Look at the globalization.
You are saying that China has no problem with a US-led world order?
Okay, well, I'm saying that China is trying to modify that. In fact, China is the largest beneficiary of the existing world order for a long, long time. But there are serious failings of the existing
China
world
wants
order.
a Chinese-led world order. It doesn't want an America-led world order. That's why we're having all of these fights in the South China Sea and everything.
Let me respond to that.
Okay,
let me
go
respond
ahead.
to that. I mean, you keep on interrupting me. How can I respond?
Go ahead. I'm waiting for you to respond. Yeah.
Please allow me. Well, I think that China doesn't want to change the world. Don't want to modify that. But of course, China does not want to lead the world order. I don't think that China wants to lead it. And then that's the point. China wants to have a major contribution to modifying the world order. But of course, China's strength lies in the global connectivity. And China sits right at the top of the global supply value chain. And that's just the reality. And then, of course, China doesn't buy this rhetoric of autocracy versus democracy. Well, look at a lot of so-called democratic countries are faring and compare with the legitimacy of the Chinese government.
But by the way, in BRICS, and now in this extended group of members of BRICS, Russia is not a democracy. China is not a democracy. Brazil, well, you know, they've had elections last year. India is a democracy. South Africa has also had elections last year. Look at the newer members. Saudi Arabia, not a democracy. Iran, not a democracy. Egypt, not a democracy. Ethiopia, not really a democracy. And neither is the United Arab Emirates. So let's not get into this whole democracy talk, because BRICS is not exactly a conglomeration of democracy. So that's what I go back to the point of, you know, what is it that binds these groups together? Frankly, I don't know what binds these groups together, other than they want to see a change of the existing world order. But be that as it may, I'm going to wrap up this discussion. We'll see how this story plays out. But like I said, the fact that the Indian Prime Minister has met the Russian president, the Iranian president, and will be meeting the Chinese president is very, very significant. It's going to be viewed with very great interest in Washington, in London, in all of the European capitals, certainly in Ottawa now, given the ongoing tensions between India and Canada. But I think it is India signaling that, yes, this is what we believe is strategic autonomy. It is also India showing the United States in particular that, look, we have leverage. You're not our only friends, down the street. We have other allies and other partners as well. So I think it's a bit of a, to use Gen Z language, it's a bit of a flex. But let's see if that actually results in material changes to how business is done.